In 1939, a little black boy was working as a shoeshine boy. The boy's name was Bernard. He looked very shabby with his ugly hat, but who would have thought that behind his appearance were extraordinary business skills? Notice that he deliberately chose to set up his stall in front of the bank so that all his customers were wealthy white people. He didn't care about the little money he made shining shoes. He worked slowly so he could overhear the financial secrets the white people talked about while they waited. When they left, the little boy would write them down in a notebook. All he wanted was the valuable financial knowledge he learned from them. From a very young age, he knew his dream was to become a great banker. But this was Texas in 1939, a place where blacks were oppressed by severe discrimination. His father sadly told him that his dream was impossible, but Bernard's eyes showed a strong determination to go against the odds. 15 years later, the grown-up boy moves to Los Angeles with his wife, Eunice, and their children. The racial discrimination here is not as severe as in his homeland, so he decides to start his business here. The family of 3 has to live in a dilapidated storeroom of a relative, but Bernard promises his wife that they will soon move out. He starts as a real estate agent, looking for houses for sale all over the city. Through keen observation, he finds that the black community in Los Angeles is overcrowded, while the white community still has many empty houses. Blacks have a need for rentals and financial strength, but there is no market. This is a great business opportunity for real estate speculation and rental. He sees a white-owned apartment with weeds on the front door, obviously not in very good condition. However, he alone sees the advantage of the location of the house, which borders the black neighborhood. He goes to the owner and says, "You're only renting half the apartment, so why don't you sell it to me? I'll give you $30,000 now, and I'll give you another $5,000 when I rent out all the rooms." Although the owner admires his idea, he doesn't want to make a risky deal. Bernard expresses his understanding. Before he leaves, he looks at the owner's calendar and sees that it is given by a local bank manager. This gives him an idea. He says goodbye to the owner and goes straight to the bank, where he finds the manager who sent the calendar. The manager's secretary, who discriminates against blacks, refuses to introduce him to the manager. He waits outside the bank for a couple of hours, and when the manager comes out, he stops him immediately. He says, "I know one of your VIP clients. The business I am doing will benefit him, and I hope you can approve a loan for me." But the bank manager turned him down without thinking. That night, he gets a call from the owner. The owner asks him, "Did you use my name to try to get a loan?" He has no choice but to apologize. Unexpectedly, the owner doesn't blame him, but admires his faith that he won't give up until he achieves his goal. The owner decides to guarantee the loan for him, so he gets the first loan of his life from the bank and buys the property. An old white lady has just come home from shopping when she sees a black man at her door. "What are you doing?" she asks in a sharp voice. The black man calmly replies, "I'm renovating the apartment building." The old lady says with a mean face, "Workers like you should be careful." Bernard replies, "Don't worry, this is my building and I will definitely take good care of it." Speechless, the old lady angrily goes home, and the police soon arrive. They tell Bernard that an old lady called the police and then ask him if he pretended to be the owner and contradicted her. Unexpectedly, Bernard pulls out a copy of the title deed. It turns out that he had anticipated trouble and prepared in advance. The police realize that the house really belongs to him and leave in a huff. That night, Bernard returns to the apartment building. The old lady at the door sees him and immediately tells him to get out because it is not the time for renovations. Bernard calmly replies, "I am not a renovator. I am the owner now." The old lady is stunned, and a few days later she angrily moves out because she doesn't want to live in the same building with black people. As soon as the old lady leaves, Bernard rents her house to a black woman. Sure enough, as he predicted, the black tenant market is huge. The building quickly fills up, and Bernard gives the former owner the agreed-upon final payment. The former owner admires Bernard and offers to go into business with him. Bernard chooses the house and calculates the income, and the old owner negotiates the transaction and signs the contract with him. Up front, the whites won't know they're doing business with blacks, and they'll split the proceeds. Bernard readily agrees. The cooperation between the two goes very smoothly, and they make a lot of money right away. Soon after, Bernard moves from a tenement to a mansion, providing a happy life for his beloved family. This is his wisdom. If someone discriminates against him, he will not fight back, because then he would be playing by other people's rules. He wants to play by his own rules. Rational economics and maximum profit are his ultimate goals. However, life does not always go smoothly, and challenges can arise at any time. The former owner who works with Bernard is old and frail and dies suddenly. A few years later, his wife inherits his shares in the company. This woman strongly discriminates against blacks and doesn't want to work with Bernard. She contemptuously offers to buy Bernard's shares at a very low price, and if he refuses, she will sue him. In this era of black and white litigation, whom do you think the judge would favor? Bernard does not want to be treated so unfairly, so he decides to go to court. But he has to find someone to testify to prove his cooperative relationship with the old owner. He thinks of the bank manager, but the manager has already cooperated with the widow and avoids Bernard again. Extremely disappointed, Bernard stands in the bank and looks around. The neat and tidy bank building is systematically discriminatory. Just because of the color of his skin, he is often scorned when he enters the bank. Thinking about this, a bold plan gradually emerges in Bernard's mind. There are 4 banks in one building, and each of them has closed doors for this black man. At that moment, Bernard's mind came up with a brilliant idea. I'm going to buy this building and see who dares to discriminate against me again. So Bernard finds Joe, another black real estate developer in Los Angeles, and tells him his plans. At first, Joe thinks he is crazy because the land price for the building is extremely high, and no black person has ever bought land in downtown LA. After some discussion, however, Joe discovers that Bernard is not a delusional man, but a thoughtful rationalist. Bernard's goal in buying the building was to gain leverage with the bank inside. He believed that owning the building would ensure that the bank would serve him and make loans, because they wouldn't dare turn him down. They would also inform him of real estate trends, making his real estate business smoother. Although Joe was extremely wealthy, he also faced discrimination from white people. He saw the potential to make more money by challenging white bankers on their own turf. To negotiate with whites, they needed a white agent. And Bernard already had an idea. Matt, who had helped him with the renovations. Matt was an honest and ambitious man, if a little inexperienced. So Bernard and Joe began an extensive training program for Matt, teaching him golf, manners, mathematical reasoning, and real estate. Matt lives up to expectations and quickly becomes proficient at golf. While playing golf, he can calculate real estate valuations like a young and promising entrepreneur. At a golf club, Matt meets the owner of the bank building. Of course, this meeting was also arranged by Joe. The meeting goes well, Matt gets the chance to buy the building, and the rest will be negotiated. Don't worry. Before the negotiation, Bernard helps Matt with all the preparations. He first counts the number of lights in the building after dark, calculates the building's vacancy rate, and then gets the estimated value of the building through the building's annual income and operating expenses. Bernard prepares all the numbers and asks Matt to memorize them before meeting with the owner. As a result, no matter how the big boss bluffs about his property, Matt is always one step ahead and gives the exact number, which shocks the big boss. The accountant next to him is also stunned. They all think they've met a math genius who can't be fooled. In the end, Bernard gets the building, originally valued at more than $2.4 million, for only $156 million. From now on, whenever Bernard goes in or out of the building, the president of every bank will come to shake his hand. The small manager, who had given him a hard time in the past, is shocked. With the support of the banking industry, Bernard and Joe's real estate careers expand rapidly. They single-handedly break the strict zoning that segregated Black and white Los Angeles. Many young and promising Blacks move into white neighborhoods. Soon, they were even received by the vice president. Several years later, in 1963, Bernard takes his family back to Texas to visit his father, Britton. After dinner, Britton tells Bernard that he's proud of his accomplishments. The next day, Bernard takes his son for a walk around town. Before they know it, they are standing in front of the bank where Bernard worked as a shoeshine boy. At the time, Texas was the most racist place in America. They meet a young boy shining shoes, just like Bernard did when he was a little boy. To Bernard's surprise, the boy only wants to work on white people's shoes. This little incident touches Bernard and awakens his sense of responsibility to his fellow man. He secretly decides that he must change the status quo and help the Black community in his hometown get better housing. The next day, Bernard visits Joe and tells him that they should buy the Mainland Bank in Texas. Joe thinks Bernard is out of his mind for even thinking about it because of the racism in Texas. But Bernard manages to give compelling reasons for the purchase. In the end, Joe agrees to help Bernard. They recruit Matt again and use him as their frontman. They meet with the bank owner, Robert Florence Sr. and Jr., to discuss the numbers of the deal. Despite Florence Jr.'s suspicions, Senior sells the bank to Matt and his partners. With the Mainland Bank acquired, Bernard goes to work and begins helping the African Americans in town get approved for loans. It seems that Bernard's goal is to help his fellow man get a fair shot at housing and even money-making opportunities. Things go well for a while until Florence Jr. starts investigating the loans their bank is approving. One day, Florence follows Matt and meets with Bernard and Joe. He confronts them about the loans they approved and threatens them with a letter from the U.S. Treasury Department. He says the department will inspect the bank's operations in a month. As Florence Jr. leaves, the boys discuss their next moves. During this time, Matt comes up with a suggestion. He suggests that they buy another bank and transfer the problem loans from Mainland to that bank. They discuss buying Marlon Moore's bank, and Bernard says the main problem is overseeing the bank's operations. In response, Matt suggests that he be allowed to run the new bank. Bernard expresses his discomfort with the idea, but eventually agrees to let Eunice keep an eye on Matt. In the end, Matt gets to run his bank the way he wanted. The next day, Matt meets with a lawyer and starts signing loan contracts on his signal. Sometime later, Matt gets a call from Florence Jr. about clients who want to withdraw all their money from Mainland. To make matters worse, a federal bank examiner arrives at Marlin to help Matt. Bernard forces himself to dress up as a janitor so he can get close during the meeting. Unfortunately, it doesn't make any difference as the examiner discovers a critical problem with several loans. Bernard is incredulous that the absurd loans were approved. Eventually, they learn that it was Florence Jr.'s doing all along. It turns out that in his rush to run his bank, Matt skipped protocols and used a lawyer Florence recommended. This allowed Florence to sneak in the bad loans. Sometime later, Bernard and Joe tell Matt that the most rational move they can make is to walk away from the Bank of Marlin. Unwilling to give up his bank, Matt makes a move without telling his partners. Joe learns of his move the next day and rushes to Mainland Bank with Bernard. They confront Matt about the loans while Florence watches the spectacle with a proud look on her face. Bernard tells Matt to get the books, but it's too late. Federal bank examiners arrive to revoke Mainland Bank's charter. As they leave the building, the FBI arrests Bernard and Joe. Bernard tries to resist, but it's a futile struggle. Sometime later, Bernard and Joe meet with their lawyer. They learn that their case has been tied up with some racial politics in the country. Meanwhile, Matt talks to Senator McClellan about testifying against his partners in exchange for his freedom. Matt contemplates his next move that night and makes a phone call. Matt follows McClellan's suggestion and testifies against his partners at the Senate hearing the next day. Later that day, Bernard also meets with McClellan and listens to his proposal. He gives him the choice of taking an immunity deal and confirming Matt's testimony, or Bernard can say whatever he wants and go to jail. In the end, Bernard decides to say the words that have been kept in his heart for years. He talks about racial discrimination in the country.
Mr. Chairman, our nation's founding documents declare that all men are created equal and endeavor to create a society where citizens receive the equal protection of our laws. To noble goal. But we all know, for many citizens it's a lie. This hearing is supposed to be about uncovering and reforming unsafe banking practices. But I think it's really about how on earth did two black men pull off owning a bank in Texas. I can talk at length about that. Or I can sum it up with this. The dress code. I'm not finished. You can't get a loan, you can't own a home, you can't start a business, which means you can't build wealth, and you're excluded from the American dream. Why is it so important to you to exclude an entire race of people from the American dream?
Shortly thereafter, both Bernard's and Joe's fortunes were decimated after the hearing. The two are also sentenced to federal prison. Florence Jr. buys the Mainland Bank for a small fraction of what Bernard and Joe paid. Meanwhile, Matt Steiner was never charged with any crime. Several years later, Bernard and Joe get out of prison. Eunice finds it strange that the two men seem happy even after losing all their fortune. It turns out that's not the case at all. Joe reveals that they have properties next to each other in the Bahamas. Eunice is in disbelief and asks Bernard how that happened. It turns out that the man Matt called the night before his testimony was Bernard. He told Bernard about the senator's deal and apologized to him. In return, Bernard asked for a favor before the government could seize their assets.